of the song. So I like that.
That's just playing it as it goes. But that's what we're all about, isn't
Yeah,
it? We're
yeah.
just a small group of people, but we're changing the world.
Yeah.
We are. One
Right on.
All
teacher,
right.
one group of teachers at a time. And how many lives did we change when we were 30 teachers, 34 teachers in the room? How many students does every teacher have? A lot of lives being changed here.
Way too many.
It gets exponential.
sometimes it feels that way, yes. So ladies and gentlemen, we bring you the wonderful Barbara Hassan Sakamoto today, who's going to be teaching us all kinds of great things. And I won't embarrass Barbara too much, but Barbara is my hero. I work with her every single day. She's not only the author of one of the world's most used and most loved course books called Let's Go, but she is an inspiration to just really thousands of teachers around the world, and I'm so grateful that I have a chance to work with her. iTDi. She helps me with technical problems, life problems, teaching problems, just all kinds of things. And whenever I need some advice, I just go, "Hey, Barb," and there we go. That's all it takes. You know that's true, right, Jace?
It is absolutely true.
All right. So Jason and I are going to step back and take it away, Barbara. We'll be
Thank
in the
you,
back
Oh
row
Barbara.
if you need
gosh.
Thanks
us.
so much.
Okay, I'm gonna switch over. Well, I have no there. I mean, there's no way to go, no place to go but down after all this intro. Oh, Rose, I love you too. It's okay. Well, um, yeah, I'm going to be talking about 21st century skills in the classroom, but I have to make a confession at first. I actually don't really like the term 21st century skills. I'm not a big fan of buzzwords in general. And every time I start talking about this, I can't get past the idea that, it's 2015. So we're like already 15 years into the 21st century. So at what point do we get to start calling them skills? Like not some special skills that make it sound like something that teachers have to learn that's special. I think what you're going to notice is that there's a lot of things that are identified, for 21st century skills that you're already doing because especially if you are online, if you are getting your professional development online, a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about tonight are things that are already, you'll be looking at them thinking like, why are people making a big deal out of this? These are just skills. So on the other hand, if I did a presentation called like skills for good teaching, um, it wouldn't get nearly the attention. So that's one reason that I still use the term. But yeah, I'd like you to think about all of this as just skills in the same way that you teach, you have skill, you teach content skills, and these are just another type of skills, and they're already part of what you're likely doing in your class. And one reason, though, that they are very important, um, this is a picture of the Oxford University manager for Indonesia. His name is Joseph, and he's actually from Taiwan, and he doesn't speak Bahasa Indonesian. At least he didn't when I was there. And this was such a great example of why it's important for students to learn skills for thinking critically or solving problems or innovating, collaborating, and communicating. Because when I was in Indonesia last, which I think was end of April, beginning of May of this year, it was a holiday weekend. And I don't know why everybody thought that, oh, yeah, let's try to move around Indonesia on one of the biggest holiday weekends of the year and it'll be no problem. Well, going to the airport, the international airport in Jakarta might only be about 30 kilometers out of town, but on this day we allowed 2 hours to go the 30 kilometers, and it took 3. So we were pulling up at the airport while my flight was leaving. And the reason I have this picture here is because Joseph has a phone on both ears because he's talking to the office manager, or he's talking to one of the reps who's translating into Bahasa Indonesia for the office person who's calling the airport trying to get me another flight. And they're both translating for the driver who's getting us there. And none of that was covered in the content for what Joseph learned for his job, right? He might have learned business skills. He might have studied publishing. He probably started out as a language teacher, as a lot of us. But if he hadn't had the ability to think critically or solve problems creatively or innovating or collaborating or communicating, I my entire tour of the country and the 3 presentations that came after that would have never happened. So it's a really good example of why these are just life skills now. They're not anything special. Yeah, no, he was not calling himself. Okay. But what are 21st century skills? I suspect that most of you have heard an awful lot of them. What have you heard called the 21st century skills? Could you go ahead and type it in chat? Okay, multitasking. Okay, there's a lot of different things here, and I've seen most of them listed, actually. Okay. It depends. There's a lot of lists of 21st century skills. And if you start searching for them, you'll see a lot of different, you'll see all of these skills listed on different lists. There are learning skills, there are life skills, there are literacy skills. There's lists for every area. And so when we talk about 21st century, when we talk about 21st century skills, I think it's really important to be clear about what exactly we're talking about because, like most buzzwords, we might have totally different definitions of it. We might both say, oh, yeah, 21st century skills. And yet, one person is thinking about cultural awareness and the other person is thinking about critical thinking. So it's important to be clear about what we're talking about. The one thing that all skills have always done, schools, the function of schools is to train students to live successfully in society, create good citizens and good workers and people who are going to, support us as we get older. And so when I went to school back in the industrial age, the key skills, and give a shout out if these are some of the things you learned in school too, was knowledge. Okay, I trained to be a teacher. I had friends who trained to be firemen. They trained to be foresters. They trained to be mechanics. They trained to be, well, nobody in my grade level trained to be software engineers because we didn't have computers yet. It was important to know how to follow directions. It was important to know how to get along with others, to be a team player. Working hard was an ethic. You joined a company and you worked really hard and you got a pension and all life is good. And being professional, which meant, being efficient and prompt and honest and fair. Any of these sound like they're outdated? No. These are still really important skills. I think that our students still need to learn knowledge. They still need to be able to follow directions. They still need to get along with other people, and they still need to be able to work hard, and they need to be able to be professional. So they're not outdated at all. However, in the information age, which is where children are going to school now, and probably where the time when most of you also went to school, since I think an awful lot of you are significantly younger than I am. But the students need to learn those skills plus more. They need to be able to think deeply about issues. They need to be able to solve problems creatively. They need to be able to work in teams. They need to be able to communicate clearly in many media. Right now, students are using text chat, they're using Snapchat, they're not using Facebook so much anymore, but they're using, they are discovering all kinds of media for communicating with other people. They need to keep up with ever-changing technologies, and they need to deal with a flood of information. I go to Google because I don't have to remember things anymore. I just need to know where to search for it. But can you imagine, without a filter, having to deal with all the information that's out there, and especially all the fake information? Students need to learn how to evaluate the information they receive because they're not getting it from the course books. There is no filter between the information and them, so they need to learn how to evaluate it. So at the end of the day, we don't actually know where our students are going to go. We don't know what the world is going to look like for them in 10 years. If I think back to the way the world worked, or the way the world looked when I graduated from high school in 1978, there are so many things now that I could never have imagined. So change is really rapid. And so we need our students to be able to be flexible, to take initiative, to be leaders when they need to be, and to produce something new and useful. Okay, so it's an awful lot to expect. It's also an awful lot to expect of teachers, which I'll be getting to in a minute. So what role, if any, okay, we're looking at that long list of skills that you put into the chat and the skills that we listed on the page or on the two screens. What role do those play in the English language classroom? So the biggest question I have about all of this is, how can English teachers best help students develop 21st century skills? Now, I'm assuming you have a limited amount of time you see your students each week, right? In Japan, we typically see students 1 hour a week. If they're in elementary school, you might see them 20 minutes a week. How about you? If you're teaching children, how much contact time do you have each week? More than an hour? 3 hours a week, okay? 2.5 hours a week. Well, that's better than Japan, which I guess could be indicative of why Japan's English level is lower than a lot of your countries. Okay, but even so, the amount of time that they spend in your class is less than the total amount of time that they're in classes in the entire school day, correct? Right, so English is one subject out of usually, 6 or 7, right? So if you need to do English and these skills in your class, how do you manage the balance? And for me, as a teacher trainer, that is the biggest question, because I see teachers trying to do all the 21st century skills. I see them trying to use course books that are too hard for their students because they include critical thinking and collaboration and communication and creativity. And what happens is that the students end up using their first language to complete the tasks. Right? It's great 21st century skill training, but it's not really great English training. So I think that the best thing, the most important thing that English teachers can do to develop 21st century skills is teach English. Right? Your class is the only place that the students are learning English. They can learn 21st century skills in every class. They ought to be. I mean, as we've agreed, they're just skills now. So they ought to be getting these skills in the way teachers teach in every class, not just English class. But they're probably only getting English in your class. So the most important thing you can do is give your students really good English skills. Help them develop really strong English skills, because Otherwise, how are they going to learn the language that they're going to need in order to do all of those 21st century skills with people around the world? Right? Because the language of international communication so far is English. So your main priority is to teach English. Now, you can teach it in a way that develops the skills at the same time. And that's what we'll be looking at for the rest of this session. Okay, so everybody with me so far? Okay. The main point that I want you to remember about teaching English in the class is that it isn't how much you teach. It's how much your students can do with the language they learn. I see a lot of teachers, like I mentioned earlier, trying to cram more and more into every class. Now, sometimes the pressure for that is from parents, and sometimes the pressure is from the school leaders, and sometimes the pressure is from the teacher, him or herself. But there is a lot of pressure to include more vocabulary and more grammar and technology skills and collaboration and innovation and project work. And at the end of the day, the students come back the next week. Well, the students leave class and they come back and they can't tell you what they learned. They can't use the English that they learned because they didn't actually get a chance to use it. So they just had to race through the class and try to cover everything. And this also happens when, I've seen teachers want to use books that have a lot on every page, simply because it looks like the students are learning a lot. But if you have to spend all of your time explaining what's on the page, or if the language level in the book or the project is beyond the student's language ability, what happens? What happens if you're trying to include too much in a class, or if you give students projects that are too hard for them to do in English? They don't necessarily give up, because a lot of times the projects are really interesting and they like them, but they switch to their first language because they're focused on the task. They want to complete the task. And the only way they can complete it is that they use their first language. So you might be doing a really great job of teaching creative thinking and innovative thinking and critical thinking, but you missed the boat on teaching English. Okay, so you need to make sure that the tasks are at the level the students can do with the language that they've already learned. I think you all have an opinion about this. So what is the most important factor for success in developing 21st century skills? If you had to pick one thing, what do you think the most important thing is? Okay, SMART objectives, storytelling, staging, listening to others, motivation, flexibility. Okay, those are all good things. Personalized tasks, good planning. Those are all great ideas. And actually, I was going to say, I'm impressed that nobody has mentioned technology. Because you know what was interesting? The OECD conducted a study, I don't know how long it was. It was over a period of several years with countries around the world. And they looked at classrooms in countries around the world to see what actually worked in order to develop these skills. And technology had nothing to do with it. The students who developed the best 21st century skill use were students who were taught in a way that had them using those skills. So for example, if you want your students to be really good at problem solving, then they have to have chances to solve problems. Right? So it was using activities that match the skills you want to teach. So the most important factor that researchers have discovered for success in the 21st century skills is the teacher. Okay? Skilled teachers are the most important factor. Teachers that are able to teach in a way that allows students to practice the skills that we want them to learn. I'm pretty sure in your own training, you went through a lesson that talked about teaching to the test, right? And make sure that you're actually testing what it is your students are learning. So if you're having an oral communication class, don't give a written test, that kind of thing. Well, it's the same thing. They're saying that you can't talk about the 21st century skills and expect students to actually get any of it. They actually have to collaborate, they have to communicate, they have to think creatively, and they have to think critically in order to learn how to do those things. And that has nothing to do with the book. It has nothing to do with technology. It has everything to do with the teacher. So teacher training is the most important factor for success in 21st century skills. Yeah, and I always get in trouble because I am not a student-centered teacher. I was in a plenary once with Penny Ur, and she asked everybody to raise their hands, like, if you think that the teacher is the boss or the students are the boss. And I often have my students working independently and working collaboratively, and I often have them making choices about what they want to do, but it's because I decide that is the best way to reach the goal for the lesson. So I describe myself as a benevolent dictator in my classes. So my teaching philosophy, which is quite outdated, I know. So okay, so we're going to focus on the 4 skills that are most appropriate for language class. Lots of courses, there's lots of skills, and hopefully your students are getting these in their other classes as well. These 4 are the easiest to include in a language class because you're already doing an awful lot of these. Okay, so critical thinking, creative thinking, collaborating, and communicating. Okay, so those are the 4 skills we're going to look at. Now, we're going to look at some different types of activities, and I'm going to ask you why they're effective or why they're not effective. And what I want you to see is that a lot of these are what you might already be doing, and in some cases, they just have a slight different tweak to them, if you will. Okay, so for example here, all right, has anybody ever seen a worksheet that looks something like this? Yeah. Actually, I'm embarrassed to say, when I got my master's degree, we've had these huge giant computers for the first time, and we had to learn BASIC programming language because, BASIC, you'd never go wrong with BASIC. Everybody would have to know how to use BASIC. And so we spent days learning how to program a worksheet like this, where people would just fill in the blanks. And we were so proud of it. Okay, so why? I'll tell you that this isn't a very good worksheet for developing critical thinking. Why is that? I mean, it's not bad. It's got collocations going here. So you have to know that isn't going to go with pink, for example. It has to be a noun, right? So people are matching and they're a process of elimination. And it's not a dreadful activity because, as you point out, they do need to get the language, right? And this is a good way to check that they actually understand those collocations. But it isn't enough by itself. It should be just a first step. Okay, so compare that to this. Okay, now, what if I showed you this and I asked you to either tell me how many sentences you can find or how many questions you can find? And why don't you go ahead and give it a try? Pick questions or sentences and start typing into the chat either the sentences or the questions that you find. You can use a word more than once. Shreya, thank you for correcting my spelling on favorite. Okay, you guys have got it. Yeah. So why is it better? What are you having to do with this activity that you didn't have to do in the previous one? Right? You're making the decisions. And it's creative. You have some choices here. You can make some silly sentences. It's personal, right? And all I did to create it was I took the sentences from the student's course book, from their grammar worksheet. I just typed in the sentences in Wordle. And the more times a word appears, the bigger the word is, which is also a good way of reinforcing with the children uh, which words are the most important to know how to spell, right? It may not be as important to learn how to spell giraffe as it is to learn how to spell what, because what is bigger. Yeah, and students have a fun time. Now you can do this with outline. Also, you can have students color the nouns one color and color the verbs a different color. But yeah, Wordle.net is one of those free tools that I get a lot of mileage out. Thank you for typing that in, Stephen. And you'll get a copy of the chat later, so you'll get a chance to see all these, that you'll have live links. Okay, so that's just what you can do, exactly the same type of practice in a slightly different way. The only use of technology here is that I made a handout using Wordle at home on my computer, and I printed it out and took it to class. So it's not like you need a lot of technology to make a difference here. But the students get really invested in trying to find, and you can have a race, you can make it collaborative by letting them work in teams and see who can come up with the most questions and who can come up with the most answers. Give a time limit. You can tell them that they have to use each word a certain number of times. I love putting parameters on things. I find that it's easier for my students to use to use the language they know if I set sort of boundaries over what's expected for them. If I give them a task without boundaries, then they tend to go into their first, yeah, tuxedo is good too. They tend to go into their first language. Okay, so now this is a very typical activity in children's classes, right? We have children group cards into categories to show that they understand how things are bound together. So if you look at these picture cards here, how many categories do you see? Four. Okay, five. So which category? Okay, we see class objects, clothes, animals, toys. Food. Okay. Well, most kids, the first time they do this, I'll put them into this 5 categories. Clothing, classroom objects, food, toys, animals. All right. And it's not a bad activity. Again, it's like the first handout. It's not bad, but a slight change to it can also help us build 21st century skills. I want you to find one new category, at least one new category here. How could you group these cards in a different way? Can you find a new category? Plural, singular, long things. Long things. The long things, Stephen, what would be the long things? Things you might see at the movies. Jason, that's great. I can tell that your students are using your fluency workouts to get that kind of level of language complexity. Countable and uncountable, unhealthy foods. Victor, why would it be better using realia? I love Realia, but I also use a lot of teacher or picture cards. I'm wondering why you think that Realia would be better. Hmm, more authentic language. Well, I don't know. I think like I'm unlikely to bring in an iguana, so the only way my students are going to see an iguana or a monkey in class is if I use picture cards. So I do use Realia when I can, but sometimes picture cards help you bring in language that you can't bring in otherwise. Okay, you guys have got some great categories here. This is one of the ways that my students have divided those before. Okay, so can you see what category do jeans and scissors belong to? Yeah, I see. Yeah, Josette. Yeah, a pair of jeans. They always come in two, right? Now remember, I'm teaching pretty young children, so I want to make sure that they can do this with the language that they understand. So basically, what they're going to tell me is two. Like the jeans always have two, or there's always an S. So they're going to come up with that kind of language. Or for the popcorn puzzle and grapes, yeah, many pieces. So they'll probably say many. Um, iguana, grapes, puzzle, colored pencils, green. Right? So there is no right answer here. The idea is to teach children that they can group things in a unique way and just explain it. They just have to come up with a rationale for it. And it's great for all ages. But I'll tell you a secret. The children have a much easier time with this than the adults do. By the time kids get to junior high, high school, university, and like adult English classes, they are so trained to think that there's a right answer that they really have a hard time coming up with new categories at first. The children tend to go for it right away. Now, the other way you can do it is and I'm back. Thank you for the compliment of my freeze frame. Okay, so there's some great ideas. Yeah, you can have, I think another thing that I find fun for like sort of really analytical folks, like when I teach businessmen, for example, or engineers, is to challenge them to come up with three things that are related that will be difficult for other people to guess, right? They can make it very challenging. Um, yeah, it is sort of like the animal, vegetable, mineral, or I spy. So anyway, it's a fun activity, and it's something that you already do in class. It's easy to make a small change and to make it more effective. And it also helps your students to start thinking deeply about language. They're analyzing language at a very deep level in order to find the category and to explain what the category is in language that they can use. Any questions about it before we move on? Oh, Hamdi, that's a good question. What made them look white? Yeah, actually, once we did one we had polar bear, and one of the children had polar bear and ice cream, but the picture was chocolate. And so there was a discussion about what would have to happen to make either make the polar bear brown or make the ice cream white. So yeah, kids can get into it. Very interesting. Yes, Rhett, I have a lot of picture cards. You can get almost the same images from Microsoft Clip Art if you don't have a lot of picture cards that came with a course book or something. I often make picture cards with clip art as well, and there's some good sources for that. And ELT Pix is great for the real pictures, but if you need like a picture of chalk or a picture of milk or something, then you can go to Microsoft Office and have the free clip art, and they have all that stuff. And there's tons of teacher flashcards and clip art online. All right, so here's another one that I like to do. I do a lot with cubes. Like these are all out of milk cartons. We do sometimes make sentences with the cards too. They have to use them, but it depends on the class. This is one where they definitely have to make sentences. And my students need a lot of practice with an and third person verbs. Neither one is natural in Japanese, and they have a hard time with it. And I can drill until the day is done, and they will still make the same mistakes. So what they need is some extended time working with the language and thinking about the language and learning to analyze the language, thinking critically about word order in sentences and word forms in sentences. And if I try to explain that, I'm going to have to use Japanese. And so what I did in this case, I use cubes for a lot of different things. In this case, I told the students that one cube was going to be pronouns, I, he, she, you, it, and one cube was going to have 3 have and 3 has. One cube would have 3 and 3 an. And then the last cube, I wanted 3 words that went with an, 3 words that went with So you can see them there on the floor. Okay, so I set the boundaries, I let them pick the words. And they went through their books and found words that, an egg, an eraser, an umbrella. And, oh, thank you, Matthew, that's nice. And so then they made the cubes, and basically the game is you get 3 rolls, and after you roll, you can choose which cubes you want to keep and which ones you want to roll again. So you have 3 tries to make a sentence. And the students start, at first they're kind of guessing, but after a few tries, they start correcting themselves, actually. So here, for example, let's say we're playing the game together here. So your first roll is she have an bag. Is that okay? Okay, so you have to roll. You're going to have to choose 2 cubes to roll. So you can either roll she or have, or an and bag, but you need to get 2 differences. So I'm going to roll have and bag. Okay, so hopefully, now is it okay? She have an omelet. Nope, we still have to get 1 more. So we're going to try 1 more roll here and see if we can get the right verb. And yay, you got the right verb. Okay, now if you want to see a student playing it, that YouTube channel there should be no mistake now. She has an omelet. No, that's good. That's okay. That's correct. So the thing is that the students have to practice putting the words in order, and it looks really simple, but if your students are learning English in a context where the word order is significantly different, like the word order in Japanese and the word order in English, very, very different. So students need a lot of practice, but it gets dull if they, you know, this gives them a lot of extended practice without getting too dull so far. Yeah, we also, as they get better, then we have conjunctions and adjectives and nouns and verbs, and they learn that you can put the words together in more than one way to make a sentence. And it's a kind of game that's really flexible. I think that I have a blog post about it, either on my blog or on the iTDi blog. I'm not sure exactly, but it should be pretty easy to find. Okay, so those are cubes. And again, it's just a different way of drilling grammar. But it uses multiple senses to learn, and it gives students, they correct each other. So they help each other to find the right sentence. All right, now here's one. Here's my ELT picks. Okay, these are 6-word stories. Now, when I'm working with this with children, getting 6 words to make a sentence is enough. They don't tell much of a story. They're just trying to come up with a sentence that has all the words in order and is grammatically correct. And in this case, what's the problem here? How many words? Yeah, she has too many words here. So she needs to get it down to 6. So she has to look at what she can change. Okay, so she can make the dog shorter, right? She changed it to Ellie. So now I grew up with transformational grammar in graduate school, and this was a great transformational grammar activity because she's thinking of it at a deep level. And it looks like I froze again, and this one's not nearly as nice as the last one. Okay, here's another one. So the cat surprised the dog. Okay, what's the problem here? Not enough words. Okay. So she has 2 places where she can put the words in. And she decided to put it there. So the cat surprised the tricky dog. All right. So it's easy enough. Nobody's afraid of 6 words. And it's some fairly sophisticated grammar practice. In younger classes, I'll have them work in pairs or in small groups. Okay, now here's your chance. And I'm gonna, yeah, I know my video is freezing again, so I'm gonna go out and come in again, but I'm gonna give you a task. So as soon as I set this task up, then I'm gonna pop out one more time. And hopefully it'll be the last time I freeze. All right, here's 2 pictures. I want you to choose one of them. There's a dog in a suit. There's a cat with his paw over its mouth. I want you to pick one, and I want you to come up with a story. Now, your language is very high level, so I want you to come up with an entire story in 6 words and type it in the chat, and I shall return momentarily. Okay, now sound. These are fabulous. The cat laughed at the dog. Okay. Now, the 2 that my students came up with, right? I did this with my senior citizens too. For the dog, their sentence was, I would trade my, oh no, I'd trade my husband for him. Okay, that was for the dog. And then for the cat, they came up with bird. I didn't see any bird. Okay. So you can have a lot of fun with these. And again, what I noticed is that no one is afraid of 6 words. And so the parameters help people to be creative. Okay. Now again, I've got a link to some resources. Okay, I put together a Google Doc that has links to like slideshows where I've done this with Access students down in Mexico, and more of the writing thing. So you can easily go for all the links. And also a link to resources. I have a lot of readings about 21st century skills on my wiki. So there's links to all that there. Okay, now, listening. Okay, so we've looked at vocabulary, we've looked at grammar. Now another skill that we teach is listening. So one of the things that I have my students do after they finish their listening test is they create their own listening tests. So each one of them will go ahead and draw like 4 pictures, write 4 sentences, and then record them. And then I cut them apart and just paste them on a paper. And they have a listening test to give to each other then. And half of it is trying to guess which one of them recorded each part. Okay, so it's very, very simple. And you can just use the recorder on your smartphone or a digital recorder. That gets even easier as you get technology improves. The other thing I've done is have the older students create listening tests for the younger students. And again, the parameters here, the language is quite easy for the older students, but they have to speak clearly, they have to have good pronunciation, they have to look at what the younger students actually know how to say and design a listening test that'll work for them. I use the same principle in asking them to write stories for the younger children or to make games for the younger children. Okay, for the older kids, it's great review. And they can actually discuss the project in English because the language is so low level. So it serves 2 purposes. The younger students get some personally designed work from the older kids, and the older kids get to do some peer teaching, and they get to review some language that is probably a good thing for them to review. So then usually they're writing too, because they write out the phrases that they want to put for the test. So again, very, very simple, but it reinforces the 21st century skills along with the language skills. Okay? Yeah, and the older kids loved it. They loved being the boss. For writing, okay, so again, a lot of times your course book will have reading passages. And actually, most of the time, they make wonderful writing models. And so after my students finished reading a mystery story, I wanted them to write their own. And so they started by choosing 5 objects, and they had to connect them together in a mystery. Again, parameters, right? They had to build a story around the 5 objects. If I told them just write a mystery story, they would have focused too much on the language, and I wanted them to focus on the meaning for it. So they put together the objects, and they went through several drafts. On that list, that Google Doc I sent, you can see a link to a short slideshow that has all the stages they went through. But they had basically an outline and a first draft and peer review and discussion over it. It took 3 or 4 weeks at 1 hour a week. So we only did a little bit each week. But you know, they pick the objects, they answer the who, what, where, when, how, and then this is actually like a revised draft. Okay, so I'm not showing you all the steps because this isn't a writing workshop, but they connected the objects to make a story. And now I can guarantee you, right, if you tell your students, I want you to write 3 drafts, and in the last draft, I want you to correct all of the mistakes, it would not be a very happy project. But I told the boys, this is a class of boys, and I told them that if they could do the 3 drafts and they could finish a perfect copy of the paper to take home to their parents, then they could make a cartoon. Right? And so they were able to go back, and basically the comic, having 3 steps, went right back to their original outline. And I am frozen again, and I'm not leaving because it's almost over. So I'm just going to chalk it up to bad internet here in Kitakyushu right now. So basically, ToonDo is another one of those free tools that's very easy to use. So why don't all teachers teach this way? None of this stuff is very hard. Now, these work in large classes. We can't do what we don't know. That's it. How can we help the teachers develop the skills and the confidence they need to teach in a way that prepares students for an unknown future? Well, you're already doing it. You're all here. You're getting training. So we need to change the way we train teachers. Okay? We need to train our teachers in the same way we want them to teach. We can't train our teachers by lecturing about critical thinking, creative thinking, collaborating, and communicating. In teacher training programs, we can't lecture them about the way they should teach. We need to teach them in the way that we want them to teach, instead of the way we were trained to be teachers. Okay, so in the same way, like even in this webinar, okay, I tried to do it in a way that was participatory. So I asked you to think critically and creatively. I asked you to communicate with me in the chat. I asked you to, it's a little hard to collaborate in here, so we kind of were collaborating as a group. But we need to communicate with our teachers when we train them so that they get practice in using these skills before they hit the classroom. So the work actually starts with our teacher trainers. And that's one of the reasons that I'm actually involved in iTDi, because it's a collaborative community where teachers help each other become better teachers, because learning is social. And the more we practice collaborating together to learn, the better we are going to be able to use it in our own classrooms. So for example, some of you were in the course with Stephen Krashen. Yes, I have Vivian's certificate up there. Now, the reason I use Stephen's course, some of our courses are paid and some of them are free, like this one. Stephen actually has made his course free. So if you go to iTDi and go to our advanced courses and click on Stephen Krashen, all of his lectures are there and the resources. So it was very collaborative, and he challenged people to think critically, right? Aziz, his course is free. So if you go to iTDi and click on the advanced courses, you can watch all of his recordings. So it was his choice to make them available to everybody. And it was a great course. But there's a lot of things that are also free. Okay, our courses are paid, but we have a lot of things that are online that are free. Like we have the summer intensive, which is a lot of free, excellent things. And I have my own little Teaching Village Facebook page. There's a 30 Gold Challenge Facebook page, and a lot of you I know are involved in that. And Celt Chat, if you're in Korea or just in Asia. The iTDi blog is a huge resource for teachers. Gallery Teachers is going to have some great stuff up in September. So there's so much that's out there that's free And I only picked enough to fit on a slide. And I know that there's tons. If you have anything, any great free resource that you want to share with people, go ahead and just type it in chat. If you know of another place where people can learn a lot of new things. Oh, Tovelta, good. You got a prize. T-Cell Evo, yeah. I mean, T-Cell Evo is how I got into working online. So there's so much out there that's free for teachers and that will help you grow as a teacher. Now, of course, I think that iTDi is one of the best because I'm partial to it and I work very hard at trying to make it great, along with Chuck and Stephen and Gareth and all of our mentors and all of our associates. So what can you do to prepare your students for the future? Oh yes, Fluency MC. Do you want to type the YouTube channel in there or the link to it, Jason? So what can you do to prepare your students for the future? Storytelling, yeah. Thanks, Jason. What can you do to prepare yourself? Keep learning, right? Blog, get involved with other teachers, connect. Those are all fabulous resources. Connect and grow, try new things, work on your teacher development, sharing with other teachers. Those are all great. Okay, so I want to close with a quote from John Dewey, who said this long before any computers were ever even thought of, right? So if we teach today as we taught yesterday, we rob our children of tomorrow. So it's very important for us to make sure that we have no idea what tomorrow is going to bring for our students. So we need to make sure that we teach them a way that will prepare them to handle whatever comes their way, whatever comes in the new world. And in just an hour from now, Alexandra Kisiakova is going to have a fabulous session on ELT methods that'll talk about a lot more than I've touched on here.
Yay, Alexandra.
And that's it.
Yay, Barb. Thank you so much.
And that's it.
Even though you're frozen, we know you're there and you're just fabulous.
I'm hearing myself twice
here. Jason, are you around?
I'm here. Chuck, can you put headphones on? I think they're good.
Oh, yes, I can. Sorry.